Hey everyone, Card Cafe here, back yet again to talk about one of my favorite boys in all of Vanguard, the Blond Boy Ezel. And we're here to talk about some of the upgrades we've done now that DivineZ has come out. I think this deck has actually seen a pretty solid boost in its ability to kind of keep up and play in the meta. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's like tier 1 as good as like Razzle and Vargas, stuff like that, but definitely it's gotten a good boost. I think it is at least in the solid tier 2 range where you can really take this and do well with it if you know what you're doing. So let's kind of talk about those upgrades and what this deck is looking like now. Just a quick refresher, I know I've done this a couple times, but just for anyone who's tuning into this deck for the first time, we got a pretty unique ride line, which is obviously the first one is just when rode upon going second, draw a card. But then the grade 1, when he's rode over by the grade 2 by Biomane, you get to search out for the order that we'll talk about in a little bit. The order specifically for Ezel, put into your hand. So it's a free plus to your hand for an order. But really what's important is Biomane, the grade 2. What he says is act during the main phase so long as you specifically have Gareth and Criff. So you need these specific grade 2, 0 and 1 in the soul for this to activate, but you can discard a card from your hand to immediately superior ride up into Ezel. So this is huge going first. This means that you're superior riding up to grade 3 while your opponent is at grade 1. And you get 2 turns to just bash them in the face with all of your skills online, because all of your skills for the most part just require you to be on an Ezel Vanguard. They do not require your opponent to be at grade 3. So everything you have is live. Your opponent's at grade 1 has to just take a bunch of hits that are big and outside the guard range. So that's just the main drive and thing that this deck has going for it, is that jump up. And even if going second, you still want to do it because then you're getting to grade 3 first and you'll be able to persona ride first. So regardless, it's still a huge benefit to do it, even if going second, you only have 1 turn where you're kind of now putting your opponent on the back foot. But what does Ezel do himself? Just real quick, he has a few different skills. The first is that he can only be ridden over by cards with Ezel in their name, similar to kind of all the other encounter cards. Then he has at the beginning of the ride phase, if you have 3 or less units on the board, you can Soul Blast 1, look at the top 3, call to the board. So a good way to just kind of refill your board, especially with this deck, decks a lot of your units at the end of the battles that they attacked for certain skills. So that's nice just to refill it. Also, if you're against any sort of heavy retire deck or things that remove your board, it's nice to just have, if you're at a low count, Soul Blast 1. Quick chop, 3 check, call something. But then the main skill, the main thing that this card has going for it, is its on attack skill when your opponent finally is at grade 3. So unfortunately you don't get to do this when your opponent is at grade 1 or 2 when you ride skip. But once they have caught up to you and they're at grade 3, he can fully go off, which is when he attacks, you can counterblast 1, he'll get 10,000 power. You get to look at the top 7 cards of your deck and call up to 2 units to open rearguard circles. They have to be open, but that's not really an issue. As you'll see, you have a lot of stuff that just put your stuff on the bottom at the end of the battle they attacked, like I mentioned. And so yeah, you're just getting, it's an easy 5 attack deck at that point. You're just constantly going to be able to get 5 attacks. He gets power, making him at least 23, 33 on a persona ride turn, 41 to 46 depending on what you're boosting him with. So that just makes really good numbers. And just the constant pressure of 5 attacks is what kind of brings it home. Doesn't really give any power to what you call off of his skill, which is unfortunate, or give them any other skills, but the consistent 5 attacks is still just what's good about this deck. So the rest of the grade 3s, we are still doing max persona ride copies because you really want to make sure, ideally you're persona riding on both the grade 2 turn if you went first. And so you're just hitting massive numbers while your opponent's at grade 2. And then again, even more importantly, you're persona riding once your opponent is at grade 3 to be able to fully utilize that multi-attack 5 attack skill, and that you're getting that power to the front row to just help push you over the edge and just drive your opponent to the point where they can't guard it. So you definitely want to just make sure you're running the Grail, because you really want to persona ride as early and as often as possible. And then for the grade 3s, we are actually still running 4 copies of the Ezel order. This has actually become a little bit more important in this deck due to a certain doggo that we all know and love. This is a pretty simple card. You get to play this if you have an Ezel Vanguard, and it's just a free check the top 7 cards of your deck, call one to the board, and it gets 5k power. The big thing about this is it's free. It doesn't cost Soul Blast, doesn't cost a discard, no Counterblast, just free. So long as you're on Ezel, play it, check top 7, call one, it gets 5k power. So a great way, again, of just filling your board, making sure you're finding the important pieces that you are missing, and give it another power boost, which is nice, especially when your opponent is on like grade 1 and 2, because then you've got units due to their own power-ups that are hitting just better numbers. So I really like 4 copies of this. I wouldn't go down, because you want to make sure, again, you're seeing this at least on the first grade 3 turn that you have, if not more than that. So 4 copies. Next, first big change. We are running 4 copies of Biscotti. This is the major thing this deck has been missing. So I talked about this a little bit in the comments for the last Ezel deck profile. We couldn't really utilize Spiral Cutie for discarding during the ride line phase because she cost a Soul Blast to draw. And you couldn't Soul Blast because, again, you needed to have Gareth and Criff in your soul to activate the Superior Ride. So you couldn't use Spiral Cutie's Soul Blast because then you just want to get the Superior Ride, and the Superior Ride is more important. But because we couldn't utilize Spiral Cutie before, hand was a huge issue. I talked about this last time, and that this deck's biggest flaw by far was that you just were losing a lot of hand advantage in the early game because of discarding for Ride Line and discarding for Ezel's skill. So you're minusing 2 to your hand. Ezel only has 1 drive when you do the Superior Ride up. So you're just not getting a lot of advantage. You're just kind of vulnerable in the early game, even though you've Superior Rided up to grade 3. So this helps a lot with that, because this is an Energy Blast 3 or Counter Blast 1 when discarded from your hand during the ride phase. You can draw a card. So you're mitigating that loss at the beginning of the game if you see her early. But then she's also really good during the Persona Ride turns where you're really pushing for damage, because her Persona Ride skill is when she's placed on rear guard. If you Persona Ride this turn, again, either Counter Blast 1 or Energy Blast 3, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put 1 on top of the deck, the rest to bottom, or if it's during the main phase, you can call that card that you have on the top of your deck to the rear guard. So again, another way to fill your board or to stack your deck. And you can also just use her skill, call her off of Ezel's Superior Ride during the battle phase to still just stack the top of your deck. So another thing that Ezel just didn't have was any way to manipulate its trigger count, really, and this lets you do that to make your Ezel swings just more impactful, because now you're guaranteeing that you're at least hitting 1 trigger. So really good card, definitely a 4 of in this deck now, just because it helps really fill that gap of card advantage that you needed before. Next, we are still running 4 of the Ezel promo. This is still a pretty good card. He's got his 2 skills that when he attacks a Vanguard, if you have an Ezel, if you have an Ezel Vanguard, you get to choose one of the following skills, which is either your front row rear guards get 5,000 power, and if you choose that one, then he puts himself on the bottom of the deck at the end of the battle. So one of those examples of just tucking himself out of the way so that you can then call into that spot with Ezel. But his other option is you can choose one of your other rear guards, and at the end of the battle, bounce that rear guard back to your hand. So that's really good for just protecting certain cards. It's Din Drain. It's for protecting Drain. We've talked about this before. We know what Din Drain is. It's for if you're playing against a retire deck or something that can remove your Din Drains, you can bounce them back to your hand if we're worried about that. You don't do that too often because he doesn't bot deck himself if you choose that skill. You're mostly choosing the 5k to the rear guards, because that power gain really matters for certain cards, especially cards like Tearfelt that we'll talk about in a second, because it just makes her guarding lines harder. So 4 copies just for the ability to bot deck himself and give power to the front row, well, to the front row rear guards. And then lastly, as mentioned, we are actually still riding max copies of Tearfelt. So this is just a really good card, again, for the early game. It's pretty similar logic to all the Keter decks who are running this, plus the Minerva order, the Kennel Bus 1, Draw 2, Call 2. It's just our order of choice in this deck is the Ezel order, which is free. It doesn't cost a Kennel Blast. And you're activating it really the same turn that you would be activating the Minerva order, because you're ride skipping up to Ezel. So same idea. And this just lets you plus more to your board, because she says when she's placed on rear guard other than from a unit card's ability, you can, if you played an order this turn, you soul blast 1, top 5, call something. So the ideal combo is you're playing this order, calling something, potentially her, because she still activates, because she only says it's called from other than a unit ability, not an order ability. So you can call her off of the Reign Supreme King of Beasts order, and she will activate and call from the top 5. So that's great, but then also once your opponent is at grade 3, she's getting an extra 10,000 power so long as you have 4 units, which you'll have. Your Keter Sanctuary deck that is very easily pluses to board, so she'll get that. So she's just a good card for filling up your board, making sure, again, you're seeing your pieces, but then also adding pressure of the numbers. Ideally, like we kind of mentioned, this is your ideal combo, because when you attack with Alzatis, the promo, and give both him and ideally Tierfelt 5,000 power, Tierfelt's line is now hitting for 33 or 43, depending on Persona Ride turn, instead of 28, 38. Particularly the 28 versus 33 is the one that really matters, because now you're hitting over a 20k card. A single front trigger or a 20k blitz order no longer stops Tierfelt. They now need to commit at least another 5k shield to stop that line. So that's why this combo is really important. And why this is the other main attacker for the deck is Tierfelt still. Next, onto the grade 1s and the other big change, which should also be no surprise, we're running 4 dog. This card is just too good, and this again fixes this deck's problem that it had in the early game of hand advantage. So ideally what you're doing is you're finding this early and you're throwing it actually behind Ezel, because as you know from anyone who knows this deck coming up, you want your 2 back row rear guards to be Din Drain. But so you call this to the center back behind Ezel so that Ezel's hitting for better numbers, and then you immediately just activate his skill. Retires himself so long as you have more rear guards or played in order, which is why it's important that you have Reign of King and Beast Supreme, because then that makes him activate, and then he retires himself at the end of the battle that he boosted. He got 5,000 power for that, and then he also looks at the top 2 cards of the deck. You put 1 to hand, 1 to bottom. So just immediately plussing to your hand, being a good 13k booster. 18 if called off of King of Beasts. Another reason we like that. Just a really good. I don't know, no explanation needed. We already talked about this with Luard and Raziel. If you're running Keter, you're probably just running 4 of this. But for this deck in particular, it just, again, just like with Biscotti, really plugs the hole that this deck was feeling with the hand advantage. So you definitely want to see 4. Next, we are doing, to no one's shock again, 4 copies of Din Drain, still probably the best card in the deck. We've talked about her plenty, so just real quick. The 2 skills, when she's placed on rear guard, you can Soul Blast 2 if you have an Ezel Vanguard. Or with only 1 clan, excuse me. Soul Blast 2 counter charge, which is fine. It doesn't come up a super lot. If the game goes long, you might need to emergency Soul Blast 2 counter charge. But what she's really here for is her second skill, which is at the end of the battle that she boosted. If you have a Vanguard with Ezel on its card name, you put the rear guard that she boosted on the bottom of the deck and she restands. So this is how you make that full Ezel turn really punch, because she is both opening up the rear guard, the front row rear guard circle for Ezel to call to, and she is standing herself up so that she can boost twice, adding her 8,000 power to both attacks and making them better numbers. So max copies, like I said, you want to see her in your 2 back row rear guard columns so that she's restanding and boosting 2 rear guard swings so that all of your things are hitting best numbers. So 4 copies. Then rounding out, we are running 2 kitty cats. The cats have really grown on me. I don't know, it's just I'm running them in pretty much like every deck, at least 1 to 2 copies. And here's no exception. For anyone who doesn't know, the Keter kitty cat is the one that's for the same cost as all of them. When placed on rearguard or guardian circle, take 2 copies of cards from your ride line, either from the solar drop zone, put them back into the ride line. And in this cat's case, when placed on rearguard, look at top 5, call 1. During the main phase of its battle phase, call arrested. So another great plus to the board. You fill it up. Honestly, for this deck in particular, it's kind of more for the 20k shield, just because our shield, that power is not super high, so I like having the two 20k shields. But having yet another thing that can fill my board up is certainly not a bad thing. So 2 copies there. Perfect Guards is the same as always. 3 Nation, 1 Sanctitude. I'm just being a little silly with the Shadow Paladin Perfect Guard since it's a 1 clan. And Ezel's a 1 clan, but it's Gold Paladin versus Shadow Paladin, but I thought it was a little funny. So 3 of these, your Nation Perfect Guards are all the same. You know what they do. I know what they do. If you have 1 less card in your hand, you don't have to discard for the Perfect Guard cost. And then Sanctitude, you don't have to discard if your opponent's Vanguard has the text triple drive, and that's also going to the order zone. So it gets around guard restricts like calling 2 or more from hand to guard at the same time. Same old, same old. The other thing, trigger lineup. This is changed again. We are back up to 8 crit, full max aggression. While our 5 attack consistency is nice, we don't have any like crit pressure outside of that or any like guard restricts. So I like the 8 crits back now. Since we have fixed the hand advantage issue, I like going back up to 8 crit so that we can hopefully hit some pressure by hitting the crits. Whatever 8 crit you want it doesn't super matter. Soul can occasionally be an issue in this deck. So between Tearfelt and Ezel's skill, so having the go to soul crit can kind of be nice, but it doesn't really come up that often. For the off trigger, we are actually still running 3 draws because if you don't see Biscotti and Serengal in the early game, hand is still a problem. You'll still go into your opponent's turn with 4 cards in hand. So we still run a few draws just to kind of help offset that, and then also just for finding pieces. This is a pretty piece reliant deck. We have a lot of ways of finding those pieces, but you can still not see them, like Dindrain being the most important one. If you don't see Dindrain, your kind of whole plan falls apart. So we run a few just to make sure we get there. Heals, we're rocking the same. I think this is the same of what I was doing in Raziel. 2 restand heals just because of Varga and Shiranui. Grade heal for Shiranui and Luard, and a generic just to cover all my bases. If you want to run another grade heal, that's fine. When set 2 comes out, these are probably changing to the crit heal because we're getting Zorga and Blandemeyer into the meta. Both of them get big swings with crits, so these are probably changing to that. But for right now, I think this lineup works fine. That's what we're doing. Over trigger, no big surprise. It's still blue. There's still not really a better. If you want to run the red for an additional attack, potentially that's fine. But you don't have a rearguard that takes advantage of that extra attack. We have no rearguards that get a crit or guard restrict, like I mentioned. So as I've always said, I don't love the red OT unless you have a rearguard that can do that. And the Keter one sucks. So blue's your main option. Having a 9th crit is nice, and being able to get some pieces back from the drop zone is also good too. So that's where we're at with that. I've looked and thought about the 2 new ones coming out in Festival Collection. I don't love purple because you're always going to have a front row. Yellow would be the only one I'd maybe consider just for the draw power, and this deck again could still use some if you don't see your 2 main draw engines. So I might try out the yellow, but it's hard to argue with a 9 crit. So it might stay blue, but I'll test around with the yellow and get back to you. So yeah, that's Ezel as it stands right now. This is, if you can tell, because of how many times I come back to it, it's just one of my personal favorite decks. I've been a fan of Ezel since the beginning of his time in BTO 6. Original Vanguard set 6 when he first came out. He's just been my favorite boy. And I like that the deck, because it's Keter, we can use all these really strong Keter generics, and that just inherently makes the deck stronger. So yeah, I recommend people give it a try, dust it off if you have it, see how it feels. It's probably very cheap to build aside from the generics. So if you have the Keter generics and want to try something new, I would imagine the actual Ezel core is incredibly cheap. So you can give that a try. It's a lot of fun. just playing and just managing your pieces, making sure you get your front row cleared. It's got that like nice kind of combo to it, and it feels just really good to play. And it'll never get old watching opponents' reactions to you ride skipping up to 3 when they're on grade 1. It still just brings me so much pleasure. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Happy to answer them. And otherwise, we'll be seeing us soon. Thanks. Bye.